Right now, under the hood of the car sitting in your driveway, there is a white crust growing on your battery posts. In 1962, a mechanic in a 2-bay station would have killed that crust with a bottle of Coca-Cola that cost him a dime, and it would not have come back for a year. I want to be careful how I say this, because you have heard the Coca-Cola thing before. Somebody's uncle poured a bottle on a bumper at a picnic once, and everybody laughed. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a man who worked a service bay in a salt state for 30 years, who kept a crate of returnable bottles under his bench, and who used them for 25 separate jobs he could name in order without thinking. His customers noticed something they could not explain. Their neighbors were buying batteries every 2 winters. His customers were getting 5, 6, 7 years out of the same battery, same weather, same cars, same cold mornings. They asked him what he was selling them, and he told them the truth, which was nothing. 10 cents a bottle, and he got 2 cents back when he returned the empty. Today, that same no start is a tow, a diagnostic fee, and a bill north of $600 by the time somebody hands you your keys back. Here is what I am going to give you. Number 22 takes the baked film off your windshield that your wipers have been smearing for 2 years. Number 14 is the one that got quietly erased, because it does the exact job of a $9 bottle sold in every parts store in this country. And number 3 is the one nobody does anymore, and it is the reason his batteries live twice as long as anybody else's. Number 1 is not a trick at all. It takes 10 seconds, it costs nothing, and it is the habit underneath every other thing on this list. Let us count them down. Number 25. Freeing a rusted seized bolt. You soaked the frozen bolt, wrapped a wet rag around the head, and walked away. An hour later, sometimes a day later, it broke loose instead of snapping off in the hole. The phosphoric acid eats into the iron oxide that has welded the threads together, and welded is the right word, because rust does not sit on threads, it grows through them. A farm mechanic in 1962 freed a plow bolt this way, rather than drill it, because a snapped bolt was an afternoon and a soak was only patience. The rust glued the threads. The bottle unglued them. Number 24, stripping the rust off small parts overnight. You dropped the rusted bolts, brackets, and hardware into a pan and covered them. In the morning, the rust wiped off with a brush and the bare steel came up gray and clean underneath. A young mechanic salvaged a coffee can of hardware this way every winter because a box of bolts cost real money and the crate was already under the bench. The acid loosens rust without eating the good metal beneath it, which is why restorers still soak parts in acid today. They just pay $40 a gallon for it. Number 23. Taking the freckles off chrome. You crumpled a piece of aluminum foil, wet it, and worked it over the first orange specks on a bumper. The foil is softer than the chrome and harder than the rust, and the acid does the rest. No scratches, no polish haze. A man proud of his car in 1962 caught the freckles the week they showed, because rust caught at a speck is a wipe and rust ignored is a hole. He never gave it time to finish. Number 22, cutting the baked film off the glass. You wet a rag and went over the outside of the windshield where the bugs and road film had cooked on, then rinsed it and dried it clean. The haze came off. The wipers stopped chattering and started wiping. A man who drove nights in 1962 did this every week because a smeared windshield with headlights coming at you is the difference between seeing a child at the edge of the road and not seeing him. Rinse it after. Always rinse it after. The glass was not worn out. It was filmed over. Number 21. Cleaning a corroded ground strap. You unbolted the engine to body ground, poured a little over the lug and the contact face, scrubbed it bright, dried it, and bolted it back down tight. The dim lights came up. The slow crank came back. The flickering gauge went steady. A station mechanic in 1962 chased a dozen electrical ghosts to one green strap and charged nothing for it because it took 5 minutes. It was not the wiring that was haunted. It was one dirty connection nobody had touched in 10 years. Number 20. Backing out an exhaust stud instead of shearing it. Before you put a wrench on a rusted manifold stud, you soaked it and gave it time, wrapping the wet rag around the threads so the acid stayed where it was needed. Then it backed out whole instead of snapping off flush with the head. A mechanic who had drilled out one broken stud, too many soaked them first, every time, because 10 minutes of patience stood between him and a full day of misery. The stud did not break because it was weak. It broke because somebody was in a hurry. Number 19. Lifting the grease off the shop floor. You poured it over the black spot on the concrete, let it sit, then scrubbed and rinsed. The floor came back to a color that would show you a fresh drip the day it started. A garage owner in 1962 kept his floor clean for exactly that reason. A stained floor hides a leak. A clean floor reports one. Number 18. Flushing the scale out of a cooling system. You drained the system, filled it with cola and water, ran it up to temperature, then flushed it with clean water until the water ran clear. The acid dissolved the rust and mineral scale caked inside the radiator and the block, the buildup that chokes the flow and lets an engine run hot. He did this on every car that came in running warm, and it made his name in that town because an overheated engine warps a head or cracks a block, and a 50-cent flush stood between his customer and a repair he could not pay for. Flush it clean. Flush it twice. Sugar left behind is worse than the scale you took out. Number 17. Bringing a rusted toolbox back. You soaked the freckled wrenches and pliers until the rust wiped away, dried them, and wiped them with an oily rag so it would not come back. Tools a man had given up on came back bright. A tradesman in 1962 saved his father's set this way after a wet season in an unheated garage because good tools were bought once and handed down. The rust was reclaiming the steel. He took it back. Number 16. Soaking the varnish off small carburetor parts. You dropped the jets, the float needle, and the small brass linkage into a cup and let them sit while you worked on something else. The gum and the green corrosion came off, and passages that had been half-blocked ran open again. A tune-up man in 1962 did this rather than sell a $100 rebuild, and the engine idled clean afterward. It was not the carburetor that was worn out. It was a passage the size of a pin that had closed up. Before we go further, I want to ask you for something. If you have recognized even one of these, hit that like button. It costs you nothing, and it puts this in front of another man who still believes he ought to be able to fix his own car. And subscribe, because I am writing these down one at a time before the last of them are gone. Number 15. Freeing a seized battery hold down. You poured a little over the rust-frozen hold down bolt and bracket, let it work, then turned it out instead of rounding it off. The clamp came free and went back on tight. A mechanic who had drilled one seized hold down out of a tight, corroded corner never wanted to do it twice. The bolt was not stuck for good. It was rusted, and rust has a solvent. Number 14. Preparing bare metal before you paint it. This is the one that got erased. When you had ground a rust spot on a fender back to bare metal, you wiped the metal, let it flash off, wiped it dry, and primed it immediately. Phosphoric acid does two things at once. It neutralizes what rust is left down in the pores, and it etches the surface so the primer bites instead of sitting on top of it. Walk into any parts store today, and there's a bottle on the shelf that does exactly this, and the first ingredient on the label is phosphoric acid, and it is $9. A body man in 1962 used the crate under his bench. It was not a shortcut. It was the same chemistry with a different label on it. Number 13. Cleaning corroded bulb sockets and fuse clips. You pulled the tail light and turned signal bulbs, cleaned the green off the socket contacts with a swab, dried them completely, and put them back. The flicker stopped. The tail light went solid. A station man in 1962 did this before inspection season, because a dead tail light on a dark road is a ticket at best. It was not the bulb that burned out. It was the socket that quietly let it go. Number 12. Cleaning the starter and alternator lugs. You cleaned the heavy cable ends where they land on the starter and the charging system, brushed them bright, dried them, and put them back tight. A starter that dragged on a cold morning turned over like a new one. A mechanic in 1962 checked these before he ever condemned a starter, because a starter that cannot get its current acts exactly like a bad one. Number 11. Taking the oil stain off the driveway. You wet the spot, scrubbed it with a stiff brush, and rinsed it away. A man in 1962 kept his driveway clean, and I do not think it was about the neighbors. He wanted to know the day something started dripping that had not dripped before. Number 10. Cutting the salt haze off chrome and paint after winter. You washed the car, went over the dull white film a season of road salt leaves behind, then rinsed it all off with clean water. The bright work came back, and the mineral film that had been holding moisture against the metal was gone. A northern man did this every spring because that film is not dirt. It is the beginning of everything that rusts. Number 9. Cleaning a corroded trailer plug. You cleaned the open brass pins in the plug and the socket, dried them, and greased them. The lights held instead of going out somewhere between the field and the barn. A station mechanic in 1962 set a farmer's trailer up this way before harvest, and it ran the whole season. It was not the trailer he was protecting. It was every connection the road was trying to corrode shut. Here is the part nobody is counting. The men who ran those bays, who knew without thinking where a bottle belonged and where it did not, are nearly all gone. The youngest of them are past 80. They did not keep any of this in a book because there was no book. They kept it in their hands in 30,000 hours of lifting hoods and touching the parts that fail. When they go, the crate stays on the shelf at the grocery store, exactly where it always was, and the knowing goes into the ground with them. Picture a man who could walk down a wet row of cars on a November morning and tell you which one would not start tomorrow by the color of the crust on its posts, then fix it with his thumb before it happened. That is not something you can download. The chain ran from one bay to the next, apprentice for 50 years. Then the stations closed. If you want the rest of these before they are gone, turn the notification bell on, not the subscribe button, the little bell next to it. Subscribing does not tell you when I put one up. The bell does. Number 8. Loosening rusted lug nuts and wheel studs. You wet the studs in the seat of each nut and let it sit while you got the jack under the car. They came off instead of galling and seizing. A man in 1962 who had a flat on the shoulder in the rain understood how much that mattered. It was not strength that broke them loose. It was the 10 minutes he gave the acid. Number 7. Washing the radiator face. You rinsed the packed bugs and road film out of the front of the core, working from the engine side outward, then rinsed it down with water. The air came through again, and the engine ran at temperature instead of climbing on a hot hill. A mechanic in 1962 did this every summer, because a radiator that cannot breathe is only half a radiator, whatever the gauge says about the coolant inside it. Number 6. Cleaning the tool that had to be clean. You wiped down the wire brush and the post cleaner, then dried them and oiled them. That sounds small. It is not. A man who cleans a battery post with a brush full of last year's corrosion is grinding the same salt back into the lead. A dirty tool does not clean anything. It only moves the problem around. Number 5. Cleaning inside the cable clamp. This is where most people stop too early. Everybody cleans the post. Almost nobody cleans the inside of the clamp that goes around it. You pulled the cable off, poured a little into the bore of the clamp, worked it with a small round brush, rinsed it, and dried it. That inside surface is where half the resistance lives, and you cannot see it with the cable in place. A mechanic in 1962 cleaned both halves of every connection he ever touched. One clean surface pressed against one dirty one is still a dirty connection. Number 4. Cleaning the top of the battery case. You wiped the flat top of the battery where the dust and the acid film collect, then rinsed it and dried it. That film conducts. It is a slow leak between the two posts that will pull a battery down over 3 weeks of sitting and make a healthy battery look dead. A station man in 1962 wiped every battery top he ever laid a hand on. It was not the battery going bad, it was a path across the top of it that should not have been there. Number 3. The tray, the clamp, and the bolts underneath it. This is the one nobody does. You took the battery out, all the way out, once a year. You poured cola over the tray, the hold-down clamp, and the bolts, where acid fumes had been working every day for a year. You scrubbed the white crust out of the corners, rinsed the whole thing with clean water and baking soda, dried it completely, and coated the bare metal with grease or paint before the battery went back in. Acid left to work does not stop at the tray. It goes through the tray and into the fender. That is how a good car gets a hole in it from the inside out. He did this on every car that came through his bay in October. It was never the battery that rotted the car. It was the acid nobody had sealed away. Number 2. The posts themselves and the 4 steps that matter. You pulled both cables, negative first. You poured cola over each post and watched the crust foam up and let go. You brushed the posts and the clamps down to bright lead. And then you did the 2 things everybody skips, and these 2 are the whole trick. You rinsed every trace of it away with clean water, because sugar left on a battery post draws moisture and grows the corrosion right back, worse than it was. And you dried it and sealed it, a smear of grease or petroleum jelly over each post, so the acid fumes never touched bare metal again. A mechanic in 1962 did this once a year, in the fall, on every car he serviced, for about a dime. That is the whole answer to the question I opened with. His customers got 7 years out of a battery because the connection never had a chance to starve. The pour is not the trick. The rinse is the trick, and the seal is what makes it last. Number 1. Looking at the post before you ever turn the key. That is all. That is the whole thing. You lift the hood on a Saturday morning while the coffee is going, and you look, not at anything in particular, at the posts, at the tray, at the ground strap. You are looking for the first pale green fuzz at the base of a post, the first white bloom at the edge of a clamp before it is anything at all. And when you see it, you deal with it that morning, not next month. Corrosion never starts as a no start. It starts as a haze you could have wiped off with your thumb. Every item on this list is only this one habit made specific. Your grandfather did this without calling it anything. He called it keeping after it. 10 seconds, a few times a year, for 50 years. And he never once stood in a cold parking lot, turning a key that would not turn anything. Number 1 is not a trick. It is a look under a hood. None of these needed a certification, a scan tool, or a subscription to a manufacturer's database. They needed a 10-cent bottle, a rag, clean water, and a man who believed he could stop a failure before it started. That belief was the ordinary setting of every service station in this country. Not confidence that came out of training. Confidence that came out of intimacy. Enough hours under enough hoods to see the corrosion before it spread and the crack before it split. We did not lose the bottle. It is still on the shelf. We lost the man in the gray uniform who cleaned your battery posts without being asked and never put it on the ticket. He is gone now, and most of what he knew went into the ground with him. But not all of it. Some of it is right here. So do this. Before you do anything else this weekend, go out, lift the hood, and look at your posts. Then come back and tell me in the comments what you found. Was it clean? Was it green? How old is the battery, and how cold does it get where you are? I read every one of these, and the ones you send back are the reason I keep making them. And if this was worth your time, hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell, because the next one is the 25 things those same men did with a can of motor oil that had nothing to do with the engine, and I do not want you to miss it. The craft is not dead. It is 10 cents and a willing hand away.